on creating a digitally savvy board. Boards of directors have many issues competing for their attention, but being digitally knowledgeable and conversant in an area of digital transformation is quickly rising to the top of the list. Nearly all companies are looking for ways that technology can be used to improve their business models, customer experience, operational efficiency, and more. And boards must help them to move forward at a sufficient pace, advocating for change by supporting and sometimes nudging their CEOs. Those that do are likely to see better financial results than those who don't. I'm delighted to talk with Peter Weill, who is the senior research scientist at the MIT Sloan School of Management and chairman emeritus at MIT Center for Information Systems Research, CISR. Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series. I'm Dr. Sabine Dembkowski, founder and managing partner of Better Boards. We make the boards of the most ambitious organizations more effective. Our mission at Better Boards is to contribute to creating better boards. We do this by providing clients with an evidence-based approach for board evaluations and board development programs. Our clients can access our innovative digital board evaluation platform for their fully facilitated external or internal board evaluation. The platform offers automated analysis, graph generation, benchmarks and comparisons, and individualized reports for every director. To fulfill our mission, we give a voice to all who care about creating better boards. Peter, a very big thank you for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thank you, Sabine. It's so great to be with you.
Before we start, I would like to put Peter a little bit into context so that our listeners can really fully appreciate who our podcast partner is this time. Cliff Davis, an American publisher, ranked Peter as one of the most influential people in IT. In fact, he has a spot number 24 in the world, and he is the highest ranked academic. He has written over 10 books and worked with more than 50 corporations and facilitated board sessions. So it's a real pleasure, and I'm sure you will enjoy this podcast particularly. Peter, now that we can jump in, so much talk about digital savviness, but what does it actually mean?
It's a great question, Sabine, and my colleagues at MIT, Stephanie Warner and I, and Armin Shaw have spent a couple of years trying to figure that out. Before I tell you how we define it, let me tell you the bottom line. What we found by studying the digital savviness of all listed companies in the United States with more than $1 billion in revenue, we assessed the digital savviness of their boards, more than 3,000 companies. And we found only 24% of those companies were digitally savvy. And those companies had 30% or more higher revenue growth, return on assets, and market cap growth. So about a quarter have digitally savvy boards, and those companies performed way better than the rest. And you would imagine the rest of the organizations are digitally savvy as well. Mm-hmm. So to get there, we interviewed and surveyed more than 100 directors and then hundreds of CIOs and CEOs to ask them, so what is this secret sauce of being digitally savvy? And here's what we concluded. Digital savviness, and I'd love your listeners to evaluate themselves on this criteria. It's an understanding tested by experience of how digital will impact company success in the next decade, and also the organizational change required. So, for example, how will the rise of ecosystem business models like Amazon and Shopify affect your industry? Or how can you turn assets you already have, like banks who do identity as a service or know your customer as a service or payments as a service, into a business model? So that's what we mean by digitally savvy. And the way we measured it was we turned that set of capabilities into 270 keywords and phrases. And then, because we're at MIT, we used machine learning to download and measure from the bios of all these board members how digitally savvy they were. And we scored each individual and then each board. And some big industry differences came out. For example, 57% of boards in the information and media industry were digitally savvy. but only 24% in retail and 13% in financial services.
I mean, I'm hearing a lot that it's very hard for boards actually to find digitally savvy talent they can recruit. What's your view on this?
Yes, I'm hearing the same. But to make it even more challenging, Sabine, it takes three to digitally tango. You can't just have one digitally savvy board member. We didn't see any impact on performance or any better performance. Even two doesn't make a big difference. But when we saw three directors that were digitally savvy, performance increased significantly. And so we did a series of interviews with chairs and asked them, why is that? And I remember one chair, I won't mention his name, but he said, look, when we got our first digitally savvy board member, we patted ourselves on the back, but nobody really listened to them. And then when we got two, they talked to each other in a language that rest of us didn't quite get. It wasn't until we got three that it really made a difference. And so the question becomes, where do you look for these digitally savvy board members? And we found some really good places to look. So let me give you a few ideas. One is former or even sitting CIOs. There are now more and more chief information officers who are sitting on boards, either while they're still operating as a CIO or as a next stage in their career. Another place to look is fast clock speed industries, industries that have transformed with digital very quickly, like media, telcos, information businesses, technology businesses. Another great place to look is VCs, venture capital companies. And one that I've been working on recently is digital company founders who now sit on boards of larger organizations. So those are really interesting places to look, Sabine.
Hey, that's fantastic tips for our headhunting partner listeners. Yeah, I'm sure they took note now. Let's talk a little bit about the big opportunities and also threats for companies, if they are digitally savvy, or should they really miss the train and don't invest enough in this area?
Good question again. So the biggest opportunity is to better serve customers using digital. So to increase the customer experience, to reduce their cost to serve those customers, to reduce the friction that customers feel, but also their employees feel in trying to serve the customers. And finally, new business models. So let me give you three really quick examples. One is selling outcomes, not inputs. So most companies sell products, but what customers really want is more yield per square meter or better energy efficiency or owning a home, not getting a mortgage. So Schneider Electric, one of the companies that we describe in our new book, Future Ready, went from selling energy products to selling energy outcomes, so more energy efficiency. And so more than 50% of their revenue, which is more than 30 billion euros, is IoT-enabled, directly connected to the customer's hospital or factory or hotel. So they're really selling the output that the customer wants, not the input. And we see that as a huge trend. The other two I'll just talk about very quickly, and I mentioned it briefly already. Whatever companies already do brilliantly, like an insurance company that's good at claims or banks that are really good at identity or payments, digital is enabling those companies to sell that, we call it X as a service. So embed what they're great at in their customers' platforms. And the third option is partnering. Digital partnering, computer-to-computer partnering, opens up tremendous new opportunities. And Bayer, another company we studied in the book, has a business model called Climate, where they help their customers who are farmers measure the yield per square meter of their land. And they partner with 70 others to provide weather information and sensors and drones and many other things. So there are three things I think companies really should be focusing on: selling outcomes, not inputs, selling X as a service, and digital partnering.
So what have best-in-class boards done to become digitally savvy? Because I can imagine a lot of our listeners basically say, well, I understand. I want to get there, but we are not there. What do I have to do to get there?
Yeah. Again, I think that's a good focus for boards going forwards. I don't think there's one best way, but we did a study where we found that boards really have three key roles in digital. The first is strategy, business model disruption and opportunity. The second is oversight, overseeing major technology projects and spending to make sure that the value is delivered. And finally, defense, cyber, data privacy, outage regulations. Mm-hmm. Probably the most important thing a board chair can do is to manage the agenda so that they spend the right amount of time on each of those three. And a good breakdown we found was 50% on strategy, 15% on oversight, and 35% on defense. And typically the defense is in the risk committee or a similar committee, and oversight should be automated as much as possible, because we found that the more time boards spend on oversight doesn't make a difference in the performance of the company. So let's automate that into a dashboard and then deal with the exceptions. But it's the 50% of time on strategy that we see makes a big difference.
That actually relates very well to a discussion I just had last week at the Board Away Day. And I think a lot of boards are still grappling actually establishing the dashboards. But I think it's a very, very important point. Far too much time is still spent on the oversight and not enough time is spent on strategic discussions.
Exactly. And, by the time the management present red traffic lights, the management are already fixing it, right? The board? It's too late for the board.
Yeah, excellent point. You describe 6 ways boards can help their companies thrive in the digital area. Can you maybe just mention these 6 points and then let's zoom in on 1 or 2 of those?
Why don't I just pick a couple, Sabine? 6 is a lot to remember. Yeah. But let me pick 2. I think the first one is a common language. I have been in so many boards and management teams together where the words are used differently by different people. So platform or ecosystem or value mean different things. So one of the companies we did a case study of, I thought had a really good in financial services. They said, look, we're going to pick a handful of frameworks and use those consistently as a common language. And they also said that a digital strategy is a business strategy. It shouldn't be separated. So that's the first thing, common language, I would go with. The second is education. I do think we need to hire new digitally savvy board members. And I was really struck by the PwC annual director survey this year. I heard Leah Malone talking about it, and she said that there's quite a high level of director discontent, meaning that 48% of directors in their survey said at least one of the directors on the main board they're referring to in the survey answers should go. It was time they retired. And so director refreshment is an opportunity, but it's only a small opportunity relative to education. And my experience in working with board members is they're very, very curious. They are very fast learners. They're really good at self-motivating. And so we need to provide education that's around digital for them. And MIT has a program for digital savvy board members. But also, I think just getting your hands dirty on working the problem in the kind of retreats you were referring to is hugely important.
Now, an interesting question that I hear very often, do you see a correlation between age and digital savviness, or is this a myth?
Yeah. So there's no question there's a correlation. There has to be, because, you talk to someone who's 30 years old or 20 years old, they were born in a digital era. So they learned digital as they were learning about life. But I think the other question to ask is, do they make better directors because they're younger? And I don't know that that's for sure. What I do know is that we need a diversity on the board and that we can easily help sitting directors become more digitally savvy. And we need to do both. More younger people are going to be more digitally savvy, but they're not experienced. They haven't run companies. They haven't had to fire a CEO. They haven't had to deal with regulators. So, those skills are really important.
But there's no doubt, the other day I was on the underground in London and I saw a little baby in the tram playing with an iPhone. And I thought, gosh, where is this person? In 10 years, no chance.
One of my favorite videos, Sabine, is a 3-year-old picking up a magazine and swiping the picture and then throwing the magazine away because the picture didn't change.
Oh, that's a fantastic one. Coming back to trying to create real value here for our listeners, they like really practical insights. And maybe you can give some real practical insights. How can our listeners build the digitally savvy board? You already mentioned some of the things they should do or they could do. Maybe you can give us some more examples that are also actionable.
Sure. In this book, I mentioned Future Ready. We found that there were 4 pathways to future ready companies that are digitally competitive in this new world. And the worst progress is being made by companies who are on multiple pathways that are not coordinated. So some part of the business is on automation and industrialization, another part's on customer delight, another part's on starting a born digital unit. One of the best things a board director can do is ask questions, that's their role after all, to say, what pathways are we on? How well are we coordinated? And the second part to that is, what is the change effort needed to be future ready? And in fact, we found that one of the most difficult changes that have to occur is changing decision rights. So one of the things that boards can do very practically is ask, okay, so what's the change management plan? How do we change decision rights? And how do we measure the value? So we talked about dashboards earlier. Dashboards should measure 2 things: value creation. Digital's all about value. So value creation and value capture. And we found in this new research that only about half the value created from digital by companies is captured in the bottom line. So if you don't measure it, you won't see that.
We have to come to an end, sadly. What are the 3 things out of our discussion our listeners should take away from this podcast?
Great. I always love that challenge. The first is, do you have 3 digitally savvy directors today or a plan to get there? Because we found it's very important for top performance. The second is, do you actively manage the agendas so that you allocate the right amount of time in those 3 areas of strategy, oversight, and defense, with a goal of something like 50% of the time focused on digital around strategy issues? And thirdly, is there a common language at the board and the top management team with a dashboard that measures value capture over time?
Fantastic. Very succinct, Peter. Excellent. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Sabine, it was a pleasure. If any of the listeners would like to contact me, please go to our website at MIT. It's CISR.mit.edu.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
How can we help you and your board? We at Better Boards are always delighted to hear from you. You can best reach us at info@better-boards.com. Thank you for listening.